This is ColoniaCast, episode 47. Today we're joined by Dr. Richard Vetter, who is a veterinarian and teacher in the Faculty of Veterinary Sciences at the National University of Asunción. Dr. Vetter has extensive experience working with Paraguay's turtles and tortoises, both in the veterinary practice and in captivity, as well as in the wild. We're really excited to talk to him today about this very specific group of turtles and some of his other work. We've focused on specific locales in previous episodes, and it's always a fun thing to do to really dive into a certain place. So thank you for coming on, Dr. Vetter.
Well, thank you, guys. It's been a turn of events. It was me, actually, who contacted you, asking if you wanted to talk to someone from Latin America, and you gave me okay. So I'm happy to be here with you in this program. And well, let's get started.
All right. So, what first got you interested in turtles and tortoises, and what made you want to pursue a career as a veterinarian? We'll start there.
Well, I recall wanting to be a vet my whole life. So it was the common thing for me. And it's curious because I'm the only vet in my whole extended family. I'm the only one who studied natural sciences or health sciences in that regard. So I don't know where that came from, but I don't regret it. I wanted to be a vet my whole life, and specifically a vet for turtles and birds. I don't know where that came from either. So I was always interested. I grew up with turtles. My grandfather brought some back in the day, and I grew up with those animals. So I think that got me interested. And I don't know why I chose vet school specifically. I mean, biology was never on my mind, which would have been the logical thing growing up with animals. So I don't know why, but I chose it and I love it. And it's a new field here in Paraguay. Latin America in general, but specifically in Paraguay, we're just uncovering the superficial layer. We're getting to know species. We're still discovering species over here. So it's a great time to be alive in this place. And there's a lot to do. There's a lot to know yet. And that's awesome.
It's interesting in looking through a lot of people from the United States, when they go to school for undergrad or vet school, they just stay within the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is a big country. There's a lot of things going on there. But for a lot of internet people in other countries, it's more common, it seems like, to go abroad to another place for some level of school. I noticed that you've spent some time in Mexico in schooling. I'm curious what that experience was like and what you learned there.
Well, my whole formation, my whole career was in Paraguay. I did want to go abroad, but the costs are just huge for us. I tried some scholarships, but I didn't get them, and that's sad. I mean, you don't have to take a grudge against it, but I still want to. I'm trying. Whenever I finish my master's, I'll pursue some PhD somewhere else. But regarding Mexico, well, that strange part of our life we call the pandemic. I was stuck. I mean, I think everyone was. We were a year without doing anything. We couldn't do anything. So I looked up for some courses. I found this this online course about birds and everything, and I did it. And the last module was there in Mexico. So I went a month to Mexico. I spent 1 week doing that, finishing my course, and then. Well, it all goes back to turtles. I spent some days with Eduardo Gasol, a great veterinarian, a great person, a very kind person. He took me in. He works in Jalapa in Mexico. He has a huge animal clinic, and in his spare time, he takes care of sea turtles. So he took me to the aquarium of Veracruz. We liberated some turtles. He showed me an island where they lay eggs. It was an amazing experience in general. And I spent some time in some other rescue centers with Enrique Yarto in Mexico City. So the whole experience was pretty intense. But it's not as much as a master's or anything. It was just a course I did in Mexico.
That's really interesting. Mexico's a really fascinating place. I spent some time in Belize doing turtle work, so not super far away, and just the assemblages of turtles there is fascinating. You get such a diversity of families and forms. It's a really interesting thing. Maybe so we can, I think, dive into Paraguay's turtles and maybe kind of start broad and then narrow down a little bit to some things that you've done research-wise and specifics. But I'm curious, just to start us off, what are some of the most interesting experiences you've had with Paraguay's turtles, both in the wild and in captive or veterinary settings?
Well, to start off, we have a great advantage that we only have 10 species. So it's pretty easy to get to know them. And they're pretty different. I mean, if you don't like turtles, if you're not into animals, you'll get confused. But they're pretty different. That being said, it's like 3 or 4 species which are the most, so to say, common ones, which are kept at homes. And that's the main experience, really. What we get in the practice, what we get from our work with the Ministry of the Environment, we work a lot with them, from seizures, from taking animals from illegal traffic, and they come to us, and all the bad things that happen at home. People don't know how to keep turtles. And I mean, that's pretty universal.
Yeah.
You can't get the ideal or the perfect place or space or food for the animal, but I'm hopeful we know a little bit more than the average person. But in the end, the sad thing is they don't really care. They just want to have an animal, and the animal starts having problems. They don't want the animal anymore, so they drop it off by us, the animal with many problems, and we have to take care of it. So it's mostly terrestrials, Chelonoidis chilensis, Chelonoidis carbonaria, and sometimes Kinosternons. They are the most common ones. They're not endangered per se. But the funny thing was, working on the field when the guys from the TSA came last year, we didn't find any turtle in the field. Chelonoidis chilensis, talking specifically what you would call tortoises. So they're not easy to find. Somehow people find them, and the city is full of them. I mean, talking in a 5-year period, we've got more than 200 of these animals in the practice. And you just know they're not okay. I mean, if 200 are coming in 5 years with management issues, with nutritional issues, with being run over, being bitten by dogs, that's not okay. And that's where the problem really, where we can see the problem. The problem starts probably somewhere else, but that's what we can see. And then you have the other 7 species, which are not very common in captivity, luckily, but they are the most sensible to changes in the environment. They're mostly aquatic turtles, and they're sensitive to, we have the agricultural problems. They're changing the fields, they're changing the water ponds, they're losing habitat mainly. So they're not easy to find. When you find them, it's not in an ideal setting. It's probably when they're making bridges, when they're making rice fields, but they still come to us. So I guess we're doing something right because we're getting the animals, but the situation in general is not very promising for turtles in Paraguay. Well,
It's interesting.
So are they experiencing just declines in general around the country? Like that's why Chilensis is difficult to find, or the locals are just out there all the time, and that's how the bunch of them ended up in the city. Like
it's probably that, yeah. If you go to the open markets, you find them in boxes, like 10 turtles in a box all put together. What we could find out through talking with the Finkes, they're the ones who work the most with turtles in the Paraguayan Chaco. Apparently, these people have trained dogs that find the turtles, and they're and they're getting them together. They bring them to the cities. Probably some of them die, but in the open markets, you see a lot of them. How they find them, I don't know.
No, that's a pretty similar situation to the terrapin in Mexico and North America, that incredible amounts of them are sent overseas, and it always has me wondering, how are they even finding that many of them? So they have their ways.
I'm a bit jealous even. I mean, how
Yeah.
how did they find them?
Yeah, I don't get that. That part always blows my mind.
We talked a bit about this to Peter Paul Van Dyke when he came on about that kind of where it seems like a universal thing. I guess the money involved with it, it's just there's more incentive. It's unfortunate there's more money in the illegal illicit reptile trade than there is in the good side of that. And so I think it just motivates people a lot. That could be something. I'm curious, like, how much research is being done? I did a quick cursory Google Scholar search for research in Paraguay's turtles and tortoises. It doesn't seem like there's a lot besides what's coming into your clinic. Maybe you could speak to any projects going on, or what future projects could be good for people to look into.
The bad thing is when you research turtles in Paraguay, my name comes up. That shows you it's not good. I mean, I'm not an expert, and that's how bad we are. This year we started the Paraguayan Turtle Conservation Group, or however you want to translate it. So we're starting to work in group. The problem everywhere is you probably have some few guys doing some very good work, but isolated. They're working alone. Everyone is working alone, and you don't know what the other one is doing. So this year we got together 5, I don't want to call specialists. There's one specialist between us. It's not me. But we're starting to share our work. We're starting to put together information. We want to get a paper out with a review of what we know about turtles in Paraguay. There's probably a lot of knowledge, but it's not published. There are people who know a lot. The Fincas, for example, I'm pretty sure they know a lot about distribution, about ecology, about behavior. That's not put into paper. And you gotta put it into paper. The distributions for some turtles, and they're not up to date. If you look them up, they're probably from the 90s, from 2000. So that's gotta be rechecked. And there's got to be some starting to think about conservation colonies. It's what we're always talking with the guys from the TSA. Someone's got to start it. The amount of turtles in captivity in Paraguay, you need to put a rescue a colony. There's too much genetics getting lost. There's too much we don't know. I don't know if your question was going that way.
I think that sort of covers it. There's just a lot of sort of gaps in knowledge about Paraguay's turtles, so a big open area for students, hopefully in Paraguay, to take up those questions and formulate hopeful answers. Also, I remember at one of the past. Well, there's actually an interesting point that you made there about the fact that a lot of local people have a lot of knowledge that work at these fincas, and that it just isn't in the mainstream scientific literature. I spent some time in Costa Rica, and I had to work on a parrot project, and there was nothing published about what the parrots were eating at all. But when you talk to the first guide I talked to had a 10-minute dissertation about everything he's ever seen them eat. And it's just like there's so much knowledge out there that isn't contained in research papers and that sort of thing. So maybe it's good to streamline that, or at least get people to go out and source it and put it into something and credit people where it's due. But maybe you could, at one of the past Turtle and Tortoise Preservation Group meetings, there was someone, his name was David Fabius. I think that he works in Paraguay, but it may be Uruguay. I could have this confused. It's Uruguay. Well, regardless, I'm curious, some of the other people working with Paraguayan turtles, and what who you've networked with, and if there are a lot of other people that specifics you know of, and what you've learned from them.
Great. Yes, we've got the two big dams, Itaipu and Yacyretá, if you want to look them up. They're dams, but they produce a lot of money, and they invest that money into big research centers, what we could call a zoo, but not really a zoo because the main focus is research. And they're working with many animals. Itaipu specifically has some good experiences with native turtles. So I've included one of the professionals from there, Thomas Gosen. He's a great guy. He's a herb lover. He's a vet, but also does field work. He works with biologists, so he has a lot of experience. And then on the other side of the country, we've got a rescue center called Urutau. The owner, Holga Bagan, the cool thing with Urutau is they've had the first exportation of turtles to the big rewilding project in Argentina, where the red-footed, the Carbonaria, is extinct. So we have exported to them, I think, 40 or 80 red-footed tortoises. So that's the first legal export of turtles from Paraguay, which is also an interesting experience, getting the animals healthy, doing all the health checks, doing all the permits. That's a nice precedent for the country. Then I have included a biology student. She's called Romina Rodriguez. She was always very passionate about turtles. I remember she started studying veterinary school, then she changed to biology, but she always had the passion for turtles. And I'm missing someone, Pierre Cacciali. He's a biologist. He's a passionate herpetologist. He's the one I consider the real specialist. He's more into snakes, but he's actually working with TSA projects over here, getting genetic materials. So that's the big group. And I think there was another question. Well, getting people included into turtles is a strange thing. It happened to me. Once you start studying, you don't know many people in the turtle world. But once you start networking, you start finding the people. So that may be a problem, that students don't even consider a career in turtles because they don't know anyone. We want to try and reverse that with this conservation group. We want to do symposiums. We want to talk to the people in the field, like you mentioned. There's been some interesting experiences in the field where you talk with the people who live there, and they know everything. They know when the turtles lay eggs, when they hatch, when they're in the water, when they come out, what they eat. It's amazing. So there's a lot of information there for sure.
It's cool in a lot of situations how it's just naturally learned. It's not really something a lot of us, I think, have to commit certain things to memory because we're not seeing it day by day, but there it's just part of who those people are or that system that they're in. So the natural history is very integrated. It's really interesting. Maybe we can sort of transition to the Chaco tortoises, the Chilensis, and some of your experience with those. I'm curious, you've worked a little bit with those, at least looking for them in the wild. If there's anything you've noticed about with your experience in the wild about their behavior and habits that's interesting and maybe different than other Chelonoidus?
Well, the Chaco is the environment is amazing. It just wants to kill you. It's hot, it's spiny, it's dry, it's crazy. And for an animal that small to survive there, that's amazing. The problem is we're humans. We want to get up when the sun is out, and by then this turtle is already hidden. I mean, it's an animal that has to live in a 40-50 degrees Celsius environment, so it gets up very early with the first sun, goes out, gets something to eat, and then it hides. It hides from the intense heat up until dusk. At dusk, it goes out again, drinks water, gets some food, and then it hides again at night. So it's pretty difficult to find. You may find them in their little caves or wherever they hide. But it was a fun experience because I didn't do any field research before, up to last year when the TSA came here looking for that animal specifically. And it was my first experience doing field work with biologists, uh, seeing how they look for turtles, where they look for turtles, directly applying everything we know about their behavior in the field is crazy. I'm talking like a vet because I get the animals brought to me. You biologists, you do the opposite. You go out and look for them. So it was pretty interesting. And in there you realize why this animal, I have them in captivity. And now I realize why they're not very active during the day. It makes sense now, naturally. They avoid that intense heat. And you also realize why it is so difficult to keep them healthy in captivity. How can you replicate something so strange in captivity? 40, 50 degrees heat, cactus, dirt, sand, heat, uh, very few predators, really. And in captivity, you want to give them lettuce, tomato, which doesn't nourish them. People don't even consider giving them cactus. So that's where the problems begin. They keep them in a totally different habitat. I mean, where I'm living, which is the other side of Paraguay, it's very humid. Humidity gets to 70, 80%, and the Chaco is totally dry. So we usually find them with some fungi on the shell. They want to feed them daily. They want to give them water daily, which is not natural for this animal. I mean, the animal can be 4 months without drinking water, and it's perfectly fine. It's even hydrated. And they want to feed them daily. They want to make them drink water. They come to the practice because the animal hasn't been eating for 3 days, and that's normal. I mean, it's even good. They're usually fat. And well, there are other species in the Chaco. It's really interesting. I didn't find them yet. We're talking about Acanthochelys macrocephala, and Pallidipectoris, which actually compete with one another. Acanthochelys pallidipectoris is a very, very difficult to find. I think there are like 7 reports in our written history in the Paraguayan Chaco. The last one is from last year, I think. They live in very shallow water, which was usually normal in the dry Chaco, up to now where you have the deeper ponds for animals. And in the deeper ponds, you get Acanthochelys macrocephala, the bigger one. And apparently they compete. The macrocephala is a bit more aggressive than the Pallidipectoris, so it shies them out. And the Pallidipectoris is moving towards shallow water, which is getting fewer and fewer. So we're probably losing that species because of these changes in the environment. Then you have Timosternon, which is all over the place, very easy to find, very difficult to lose. And the Carbonaria, the red-footed tortoise, which is crazy because if you look at the distribution of Carbonaria, you get them from probably Colombia up to southern Paraguay, southern Brazil. The distribution is very wide, which cannot be normal. I mean, there's probably some subspecies going around which we're not really identifying yet. So that's for Chaco tortoises.
With
Do you have any idea what the macrocephala are eating, or why they have enlarged heads, and why they prefer deeper? I don't know if this question is really great, but or why they prefer the deeper habitat compared to the more ephemeral type wetlands?
I should know that, but I'm guessing they eat toads and small fishes in the bottom of the ponds. The head is not really that big. I don't know why they call her macrocephala. And we have another species down here, which is the Mesoclemis van der Hege. That one has a big head. The macrocephala is just a normal snake-necked turtle with a normal head. I don't know what is normal in biology. Um, but that, yeah, it's not even much bigger than the Pallidipectoris. They're just I don't know, the fascinating thing in biology. They're not very different, but the behavior is totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thinking about the competition, it could be something where it's just indirect for food resources, and one is just able to export or exploit one food source to the exclusion of the other, or that if they did have a larger head, which I assumed prior to that, that's interesting to hear that they'd actually be physically displacing the Polypectoris and causing injury, that kind of thing. So there's multiple things that could be going on. Do you know if they're do the Polypectoris there? Do you find them with more injuries, or is it just that they're using the same food resources?
I've only seen one. I've actually seen one once in my life, and I'm still bitching about it because I got one in the practice. It's the classic wildlife rescue. The animal was in the wild, and some person thought he had to rescue it because he found it.
Yeah.
And I was going to confiscate it, but then I thought I shouldn't. I have no legal authorization. But, well, the animal got to the clinic really skinny, so I asked the man to leave the turtle, to leave it to me. He said no, and he took it with him again. And, well, that's what happened. I, I would have been really happy if he left me the turtle. Well, there's a thing with the behavior. Apparently, the Acanthochelys macrocephala avoids the intense heat, so that's why he's looking for deeper waters. During the day, he keeps in the bottom, and at night he goes to the surface and eats. Probably the Pallidipectoris doesn't need this. Why? I don't know, but it's probably better evolved to sustain the heat in the Chaco. Uh, so answering your questions, I've never seen an injured Pallidipectoris. Macrocephala, yes, because they're kept as pets also. But Pallidipectoris, all the reports I've seen have been from just biologists finding them, looking for them directly. And the last one was a casual encounter on a, I don't know how to call this, on the side of the road. There was a little bit of water, and the turtle was there. It was really lucky.
That's really, yeah, it's really interesting to think about that competition. I just assumed it wasn't the case, that they would at least stratify habitat enough that it's partitioned and you don't get that, but that one is being pushed out to a certain extent, and then potentially climate change and other things are changing that more shallow pool habitat. That's a huge recurring theme on here with the swamp turtles and species that are reliant on those ephemeral pools. It's going to become more and more. That's a habitat that's really threatened with change. Maybe going back to the Chaco tortoises, the Chilensis. In terms of your experience with them in the medical practice, what are the differences that you see in terms of recovery of those, and maybe some of the unique aspects to their physiology that make them different than treating other tortoises?
Well, sadly enough, they're the ones I see the most, for good or for bad. So it's a whole sequence of things. I mean, they get it to some home illegally. No native animal can be legally acquired in Paraguay. That's the that's the thing. I mean, all of them come from illegal commerce. I still have to treat them. And, well, they get to a home. They're fed inadequately. They're kept inadequately. And at some point, something happens. Either they're kept in the cold, so they develop respiratory disease. They get run over by the owner. You know how tortoises love to be in tight places, so they usually fix under a wheel tire. And, well, the people don't look under their car before moving it, so they run over their own turtle. And dog bites in accidents are usual. We're talking about 10 to 15% of all the turtles that come to my practice. They're either run over by car or bitten by dogs. So sadly enough, there's a lot of that. And they come with many issues. I mean, they're not just only broken, but you see their shell and it's really thin because their nutrition was inadequate for so long. They're totally undercalcified, they're weak, probably dehydrated, and it just sums up a lot of other issues, probably liver failure and who knows what else, because they never go to the vet. We don't know anything about that animal up until it's run over. So you don't know if the animal was healthy before it happened, and if anything else is happening to the animal. In aquatic turtles, we don't see many issues apart from nutrition. They come usually with nutrition related issues like prolapses or just they die. But in the Chaco tortoise, we see a lot of accidents. Now, if the animal was kept more or less with a good feeding, the chances are better. You see a skeleton that's tougher. You see the animal is tougher, in contrast with the animal with practically no skeleton because of the decalcification. Those animals usually don't make it because there's just too much wrong with the animal.
Do you see any like shell deformities in one animals that were long-term captives, or are they mostly like ones that were caught as adults and kept as pets? Like,
Well, deformities we see in Carbonaria, in these
yeah,
big ones, and they're overfed with protein when they're small. So with time they develop the pyramids on the scute. In Chilensis, they're usually brought already as an adult, so you don't see the scute issues. You just see the very very thin skeleton. Even if you press them, they squeeze. They're just totally not hard, soft.
Interesting. with the with accidents, uh, what is your preferred method of dealing, or how much does the method you deal with treating shell fractures and wounds differ depending on the accident, and what is kind of your go-to procedure for that? That's something that's interesting to a lot of people, in Paraguay as well as just anywhere else where that's occurring. I think those road accidents are fairly common in general. So how do you treat that?
Well, what we always tell students is you don't just treat the problem, you treat the animal. So okay, it's fractured, it's open, but try to stabilize the animal first. Give him some painkillers, some fluids, get the animal to function, because it's no good just to close the scute and the animal's fucked up. I mean, yeah. You have to treat with painkillers, with antibiotics. You have to clean the wounds, and then look for some way to close that wounds, which can be challenging in these animals because, well, in road accidents you have all the pieces. You just have to put them back together. When it's an attack from another animal, from dogs mainly, you're missing pieces because the dog literally ate the animal. So that's where it gets tricky. But with road accidents, you want to try to put them back together as well as you can, and it can take some hardware. We use wiring, we use screws, we use epoxy, anything non-toxic, non-lethal that can help can be used. And it may look like third world country issues, but if you look at the books from Douglas Mader, from Murray Fowler, they use these things because you need some tough equipment to put together a tough animal. They use wiring, they use screws, they use bra hooks for. But the problem with turtles is when the skin that's attached to the scutes gets loose. You can't suture it because you can suture skin to shell, so you have to use bra hooks. You paste the bra hooks on the scute and suture the skin against these bra hooks, and it works really well. And I used to do it, and then I saw the book of reptile medicine, and they do the same thing, so I felt a little bit better. But you have to work with what you have. as long as it's not challenging. But yes, really important, use painkillers, use antibiotics, use sterile equipment, use clean equipment at least. Do some good to the animal. Don't just experiment with the animal.
Right. That it makes sense. How variable the analgesics you use for the pain relief, does that vary depending on the situation, or is that pretty consistent for across species and types of injury?
There's always what you want to use, and then there's what you can use or what you have. For those damaged animals, the ideal thing is opioids like morphine or fentanyl. We don't always get that. We don't always get that legally, and we don't always have access to that. So it may be challenging. In some severe cases, I've used it, but it's complicated to get those medications due to many things, legal issues, cost issues. Uh, we understand opioids are highly addictive, so you need a lot of permits to get them. But it would be the ideal thing for the fractured animals mainly. For smaller wounds, I use NSAIDs, meloxicam, mainly meloxicam. The thing with pain management in reptiles, if I may talk a little bit about it,
For
they're
sure.
just so different. These animals are so different to everything we know. In in mammals, we can use meloxicam, and we know it's an anti-inflammatory drug. It works perfectly well. You won't feel that much pain. In turtles, we're still in reptiles. We're still not sure about how these drugs work because we don't still know a lot about their physiology. For example, um, in pain, we talk about some enzymes called cyclooxygenasas. I think it's the same in English. We call them COX, COX, not what you're thinking about, COX with an X. And you have COX-1 and COX-2. Usually, COX-1 is related to some normal physiological aspects like taking care of your kidneys, producing mucus on the stomach. And COX-2 is related to inflammatory response. In general, usually medication wasn't selective. You used to treat COX as a whole. And that's where you see most of the side effects of analgesics, kidney problems, stomach issues. Nowadays, these are a little bit more selective. So you have COX-2 selective analgesia, which is meloxicam, for example. So you don't see as much side effects as you used to, but there may still be some side effects. Now, the problem with turtles is that apparently COX-1 is also involved in inflammatory response. So you have to use these old medications, once again, to treat pain in these animals. But it's fascinating because every time you get one of these patients, you have to do a little research, and you, more than learning, you see how much we don't know about these animals and how much you still have to research about these animals. So to treat pain specifically, you can use opioids. Now, if there is some inflammatory response involved, you can use NSAIDs, but you're not really sure if it's working. That's the other thing. We as a human, we just administer a medication and we're just assuming it works, which may not always be the case. Maybe you're just administering something and it's not working, which was the issue for a long time, according to some review articles. So that's the thing with turtles. I mean, you can administer a lot of things. You don't know if it's working. You don't know if it's working in every animal because ecology plays an issue there also. For a Chaco tortoise, for example, I need to have temperatures probably above 20, 25, 30 degrees Celsius for the metabolism to be activated. For uh, uh, for a water turtle over here, I don't need such a high temperature for the system to be working. So you have to know where the animal is coming from, if the liver is working. If I'm working with an animal that's been eating crap for 30 years, I cannot assume the liver is working properly. maybe it's not even working. So any medication I'm administering, I don't know if it's working, if it's being metabolized in the liver, if it's getting eliminated through the kidneys, if the kidneys are working. So it's complicated.
And that the talking about the COX receptors, if one of those that is not related to the inflammation or pain response is controlling kidney function, then I can see that's a really bad feedback loop because you can't get rid of it. And so it's just continuously piling up, and that creates longer term effects. Is that right?
That's why we usually don't take NSAIDs for more than 3 or 4 days, because that's the safe space. That's the time you can use them with no side effects usually. If you take them for 5, 6, 7 days, you'll probably start having stomach ulcers, and that's common to humans too. So you have to start administering omeprazole or some protective medication. And regarding the kidneys, if you have these animals that are in pain, probably not okay, you have to give them fluids. Keep those kidneys irrigated, keep those kidneys working with fluids so they can eliminate this medication properly. Still, you may have some issues, yes, but you can make it sort of safe to administer.
I reading through some older pet manuals, they mention enrofloxacin. This is kind of an aside, but I'm curious if you know anything about some of the side effects with that, and if that's associated with a similar thing to impacting more types of cellular cascades than is necessary.
Enrofloxacin is the favorite drug for many veterinarians. It's a great antibiotic. It's not really an antibiotic if you go etymologically. We call the antibiotics everything that comes from a living creature. So penicillin and some others. These are actually synthetic antibiotics. Anyhow, it works great. It's still showing sensitivity to many bacteria, uh, unlike many other antibiotics which have huge resistance. So it works great. It penetrates almost any tissue. It even gets into bone, into brain. And that's mainly the problem. It has been shown to be neurotoxic in some tortoises, specifically Chaco tortoise. And then again, you get to the issue. I'm administering an antibiotic. The animal doesn't die. Is that related to the antibiotic? Is it safe because I administered an antibiotic, or was the animal just good enough to fight the infection on its own? Do I have to administer an antibiotic that strong because it's a pretty toxic antibiotic? Do I have to administer it to every animal I get, or can I use another antibiotic with less side effects, less toxic, maybe less penetration into central nervous system? Uh, Usually we try to direct the treatment directly to where we want. Unless we have a meningitis, I wouldn't use an antibiotic that penetrates central nervous system. So if I have just some skin wounds, I would use an antibiotic that works good on skin, on soft tissue, and not that aggressive. Maybe even some topical antibiotics. But yes, enrofloxacin is used a lot. It has reported neurotoxicity in some species. This is not always published, that's the other issue, but it's just personal comments of animals that died upon administration of high doses of enrofloxacin. And another drug which has been badly used is ivermectin. Ivermectin is really toxic on turtles, and I've heard from people who used it and the turtle died. And well, that's the thing. Sometimes you just want to help the animal, and you don't have uh, all the backing, all the information. I'm talking about vets who don't usually work with wild animals. They want to treat them as if it's a dog. That's the thing with antiparasitics in general, in wildlife in general. I mean, if you do a coproparasitology on a turtle, you'll find loads of parasites. a huge amount of different families, different everything. But maybe that's normal, and that's what a vet that works with domestic animals doesn't consider, that the animal is a part of an ecosystem, and maybe even the animal is an ecosystem for a whole lot of living species. And maybe even these parasites have a really important role to play in the digestive system. If they don't have these parasites, they will start to have some digestive problems. This has been described in iguanas, for example. I didn't find literature about it in turtles, but it makes sense. These animals are living in an environment where they have to live with these parasites, and in the environment, they're not dying from parasitosis. So they're probably just symbiotic. But something really interesting about this one case I've had with Hydromedusa tectifera, my only experience with the species, and it was amazing. I mean, everything about the animal is amazing. It's the snake-necked turtle in Paraguay with the longest neck. I mean, the neck is longer than the body of the animal. It's beautiful animal, and we found well, actually, the animal was brought to us because it was run over, and we found some algae on the scutes on the top of the animal. As the animal was fractured, I had to clean the scutes to repair this fracture, and I couldn't get the algae out. They were so firmly rooted in that scutes, I couldn't get them out. So I took some samples and took them to a biology department, and they described the algae. I don't remember the name. But then doing some research, this algae has already been reported to be on the scutes of turtles. So we get back to the thing. The animal is a part of the environment. It coexists with a lot of other species, and they need themselves one another. So that animal, that Hydromedusa tectifera, is the home of algae, and we can't separate them. They need each other, probably. And the same was the case with some flatworms we found on the plastron. For me, it was parasites. I had to clean them off, but I sent them to a museum, and they resulted to be some temnocephalids. I've never heard that in my life. And then again, doing some research, the same temnocephalids were described in the same anatomic region, in the same species of turtles in Uruguay, in another country. So again, it's symbiotic. They need each other. They're an ecosystem. They're part of an ecosystem, and you can't just administer antiparasitics to any animal. You can't just administer antibiotics to any animal, because you have to consider the whole scope. And well, your question started with antibiotics, and it got all the way through.
Oh, you bring up a really good point there. I mean, I have some experience with sea turtles, and my first impression of the barnacles and like ecto and parasites they had were that, oh, these are just a nuisance that shouldn't be on them. But no, a lot of those are endemic species you can only find on the sea turtles, and you rely on them. So the turtles themselves can be an ecosystem for parasites of internal and external parasites. So I've just found that particularly interesting.
And that's a really interesting point. But then also like the microscopic level too, the microbiome and that sort of thing. I feel like that's an area that hasn't been really researched enough in turtles. So it just holistically, like you said, it's the organism itself is part of an environment, but it is an environment for all of these things at all different levels of scale. So it's really fascinating to think about that. And it goes back to what you said early on about keeping the animals. I mean, how do you replicate that? Because if you don't have the natural environment, then do you really have all the pieces that are required to make that animal function at the highest level?
Well, talking about that, I'm pretty sure the animal doesn't know what it has to eat. It's just there. Everything is there. And how can you replicate that? Even if the animal itself doesn't know what it has to eat, it will eat anything you put in front. But in this coevolution with a specific environment, it turns out everything he needs is there, and the plants need the animal to pass through the digestive tract and whatever. So it's it's really tricky to replicate that in captivity, really.
Yeah.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah. So maybe we can also, so there was something else related to this that is fascinating to think about. We haven't really talked about this much on any past episodes, but you published a report of the blood chemistry of a Chaco tortoise. Maybe you could just give us at any level a rundown of why is blood chemistry important? What are some of the analytes you're looking at, and what do they tell us?
Yeah, it was not really chemistry. It was the cellular part, hemogram and stuff. But yeah, that was my undergrad thesis, and then my tutor published it, and I love it as a precedent. But now, after some years looking at it, it's got some statistical errors and perception errors, but it's still a nice job. Well, blood things in animals is something veterinarians love. They get the animal, take some blood, and run down all the analysis. Just like in any other exam you do, be microbiology, be parasitology, even X-rays, and blood is not the exception. If you make a test, you will get a result. That's universal. You have to understand the result. You have to know what it says. You have to interpret the result. And that's where it gets tricky. The same as in microbiology. You do your culture and bacteria will grow. That's normal. You don't have to treat every bacteria with an antibiotic. Probably most of the bacteria are normal, even useful. The same thing with blood samples. If you take a sample, if you run it down, you will get a number. But what does that number mean? And that's what we don't know yet, clearly. It's really difficult to establish reference values for turtles because of all the requirements to have reference values. You need at least, I think, 150 animals of the same species, of the same sex, of the same age, of the same place. And you don't get that with wildlife. I mean, if you look at papers, they're getting like 10 animals, maybe 50, but when the number is bigger, they're usually from different places, and it starts getting mixed up because nothing that we know as normal in mammals is normal in reptiles. We're talking about homeostasis. That is crazy. I mean, as a human, we cannot tolerate a 3 degrees Celsius difference in temperature. If I'm 36 degrees now, with 39, I'm in a coma. With 33, I'm in a coma. So there's little space for life. In these turtles, as they're ectothermic, maybe today they woke up with 10 degrees. They're perfectly fine. At midday, they're having 30 degrees, and they're perfectly fine. So they're tolerating 20, 30 degrees in the same day, and they're perfectly fine. So they're understanding how their body works. It's really complicated. You can take blood in the morning and take blood in the afternoon, and the values will be totally different, and it means nothing. Or maybe it does, and we still don't know it. So there are a lot of changes in the body occurring during the whole day that will affect what you see in your blood sampling. What we did was try to set some reference values for the Chaco tortoise. There is one study done previously in Argentina, a huge study. They sampled more than 100 animals, even separated results by sex, by age, and I think they separated captive versus free living. We just did 35, I think, what we got in the practice. If I look at the results nowadays, I can say some of those animals were not healthy, so I would have to discard some of those results. How do I know that? You cannot take the blood sample isolated. You have to see the animal, and that's that. In a dog, you can maybe have only the blood result, and you know something's wrong, and if it's infectious, if it's bacterial, if it's viral. In a turtle, you won't know it. You have to see the animal, and once you see the animal, you have to direct your analysis. If you see an animal that's with a really bad pneumonia, for example, okay, you can take some blood sample and it will show you probably elevated white blood cells, but you already know that. You know the animal is with a respiratory infection. You can do some x-rays to confirm it. The value of the blood analysis in these animals is still not very well defined. You can do it, of course, but we don't know what the results mean just yet. And there are many other analyses we can do which may be more valuable for treating an animal, but you always have to see the animal. You just can't isolatedly take the blood sample and try to interpret what it says, because you'll get confused. It doesn't make really much sense.
It's interesting. That's not it's a tool, but it sort of just gives you part of the picture. It's not a holistic. That's with regard to the Chaco tortoises, there's some, we've talked to Maurice Rodriguez a bit about this. I think that's what we covered. It's been a while, but there's some interesting debate about if they represent multiple species or how much morphological variability there is. Curious, in your experience, seeing a lot of tortoises coming into where you work, if you've noticed morphological differences that are concordant or consistent with different areas, or if there's any credibility. You're not working across their entire range, so maybe you haven't seen all of them, but if there's anything you've seen just in Paraguay.
That's a good one.
Cool. Yes, I did my undergrad thesis on that species specifically, so I had to go through all those papers, in which firstly they separated the species into 3 species, then it turned out it's only 1 species, and now I think they're separating them into haplotypes, the Monte turtle and the I don't remember the name of the other one. But okay, the first problem is we don't know where they're coming from, the ones in captivity. We're assuming they're coming from some part of the central Chaco, where we have towns, and most of the traffic is probably coming from there. We don't know if they're coming from Argentina, which could also be a thing. We're just assuming they're all coming from the Paraguayan Chaco. I think Natalia was taking samples from the Chilensis in Paraguay to try to establish genetically to what haplotype they belong. I'm not a biologist, so I cannot identify those smaller details you do in a turtle. I looked at the ones they called Donosovarosi, Chilensis, and Petersi. For me, they look the same. I have to be honest. For me, they're the same. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but I don't have the highly defined eye in those things. Yes, it's normal that our Chilensis weigh around 600, 800 grams. I understand the ones in southern Argentina get bigger. I had very few patients over a kilo, and they're really big females usually. So that's the stranger thing. They're usually very small, which makes sense in an habitat where they don't have a lot of food, don't have a lot of water, and don't have where to hide. But I don't have a lot of information about the subspecies in Paraguay. We don't know what we have yet. It's really that.
So how much of a variation in size did you say you see? You got some over a kilogram, and I from what I remember, I thought it was the Donosovarosi that was supposed to be the larger one. Do you notice the bigger ones being darker in coloration, or is the coloration from what you've seen is about the same? Like,
for me, it's really the same.
Yeah.
Maybe if I look at some pictures, I usually take pictures of the patients. The ones I have in, I don't want to say collection, I have in the rescue center, they're usually all around 22 centimeters long. So this medium for what they describe. I think it was Petersi that were the smaller ones, around 18, 20 centimeters, but they're small. Yeah, they're usually small. The older ones are sometimes bigger. I have one that's really old that's a bit bigger. I don't remember the size. I will look at the colors now you mention it.
Yeah, I'm interested to see that. I've seen some photos of like Donosoborosi that are like much darker and very large for a Chaco tortoise. So unless I'm mixing up which of the types I'm thinking of here, but
No, it's the Dono
that's sure,
the
yeah,
so-called Donosovarosi was the bigger one. Yes.
yeah. That's but
How so in your experience, do you know much about how there it seems like there are areas where Chaco tortoises will overlap with the red-footed tortoises, where the red-footed tortoises become more of a dry, tolerant species with that kind of plasticity in terms of their habitat preferences. Are they really partitioning habitat where they overlap, or what is the situation there?
I haven't been there. It's a part of the Chaco that's pretty much inhabited, non-inhabited. There's no people there, basically. And it's a national park where apparently both species find each other. They overlap, and it's curious because you see the red-footed tortoise coming from tropical forest down to this dry Chaco forest, and it's crazy to think it's the same species, how they adapt so well to different habitats. Then again, the species adapts very well to captivity. They're very plastic. They're seen even in human settlements. Uh, they're eaten. I mean, there's some native tribes here that feed on red-footed turtle. It's even a delicacy for them. I contacted them once to ask them how they call the turtles, and they told me, yeah, that one is really tasty. They told me, uh, I wouldn't try it, but they overlap, yes. And exactly where, I don't know. I know it's near national park in the central Chaco. I know there's no human settlements in the zone. It's mainly cattle fields. It's mainly uh, that animal production sites, but they overlap. Yes.
Interesting. So I think now we can sort of go to the adventure side of things. We like to touch on the stuff that you won't necessarily get in a textbook or a research paper. I'm curious where I don't know how much work you've done abroad, but your most interesting experience working abroad, or it could just be in Paraguay working with just on any case. I'm curious what your most experience. We'll go with abroad. What was your most experience working abroad, and what did you learn while doing that?
Well, my only abroad experience regarding tortoises was in Madagascar this year. Yeah, it was this year. I was kindly invited by the TSA to help them with some field work in southern Madagascar. And it was mainly sampling wild animals and the ones they have in their rescue centers. They're doing an amazing work down there in Madagascar. Uh, the people are amazing. Everyone I've worked till now in the TSA is amazing. They're great people, and they took me from Paraguay to Madagascar to help them with some field work. So they really invested in me. I'm really grateful for that. As I said before, I had one experience working with sea turtles in Mexico, but it was nothing compared to what we did in Madagascar. The curious thing was the field in Madagascar. It was pretty much the same as the dry Chaco. It's dry, it's full of cactus, it just wants to kill you. And you see turtles everywhere. I mean, it's the perfect habitat for these desert tortoises. And the habitat for a mammal, it's just deadly. It's pure heat, pure cactus, no water. Everything is adverse, and they flourish in that situation. So it did remind me a lot of the dry Chaco in terms of adventure.
I was fortunate. I had a similar experience in 2018 where they helped support me get down there, and I was in eighth grade at the time. It was kind of crazy, but I got to help with that huge confiscation of 11,000 on the second wave, and was there for 2 weeks doing triage, that kind of thing. And helping with that. It was just wild, that many tortoises. But the spot in the spiny forest area, working in that area, it's a fascinating place. Did you get to interact with a lot of the local people, or was it mostly what was that like?
I mean, there you see how many hardships they're having, and they're still so kind. I mean, we're talking about people who live in total poverty. They don't have access to water. They barely have anything, and they're just so kind. They don't know you. They don't speak your language, but they treat you like one of their own. So for me, it was an amazing experience. Those people are amazing. We camped on near some human settlements, and they're great. And they did also help us finding turtles. They're really good at that. They found the turtles in the bush. They even told us they walked a few kilometers with the tortoise to bring them to us, and then took them back. So the effort they put in it is amazing, and it talks about the good relationship with the TSA. Uh, if it wasn't like that, I would suspect something different from the TSA. But the locals love them, so probably the work they're doing with them is also amazing. And that's really important in any conservation project. You need the people in the field. You need the people in situ, protecting the species you're protecting. It doesn't make sense otherwise.
Right. Yeah, right. If you come in from overseas and try to institute some kind of protection or change, and you don't have any local buy-in to that, you're not going to get anything done, especially somewhere like that where you're seeing this rampant poaching of radiated tortoises. That's pretty drastic. It's good. You need to fix a problem, you've got to change the heart of a lot of people there, and that's a lot driven by money, and it's tough. But like you said, I had a very similar experience with how surprising it is that most of the people there seem like they're a lot more happy than people in places where you have a lot more material objects like the US, but they're just so nice, and it's really incredible.
It's funny. You probably got the same reaction when they see white people. They get so happy. It's funny, and they want to touch your blonde hair, and it's pure love, really.
Yeah, I got there were multiple occasions where, because I was so young, it was sort of even different. But we got at the last day we were there was a whole group of kids that came out, and it got overwhelming at times because they do try to sell you things, and if you've got 15 people trying to sell you something, it'll get kind of crazy, and you've got to just push through the crowd. But they all ran behind our car screaming "no pineapple" because we taught them to say the English word for pineapple. That was fun. And there were some photos of me from there. They did my hair. They gave me like cornrows, and that was crazy, and face paint and everything, but just really nice and fun to be around. It's just fun to get a whole holistic view of different cultures, and to see that is a really thing that I still pull on now. It was unique for me as a young person getting to experience a lot of that. And it's just a cool experience. It's cool that you got to do that too. That's such an incredible place. Yeah. So in terms of your veterinary work, I'm curious what, for all the vets we've had on it, this is a fun question of like, what is the hardest turtle and just in general case that you've worked on, or most interesting case?
Okay, turtle. I have to say there are very few times I get a healthy turtle in the practice. But okay, the difficult thing is if the turtle is not visibly sick, but you know the management is not correct, you have to explain to the owner. They have to change the management. They tell you, no, this turtle has been eating lettuce and tomato for 20 years and it's perfectly fine. And you know the animal is not perfectly fine, and it may go bad anytime, but you have to try to explain to the owner what changes have to be made and why. and that can get really tricky. Different to when they get run over or when they're visibly sick, when the owner has to admit that something is wrong. So that's on the turtle side of things. Some tricky cases we got is with big mammals. Okay, big for us. We got some maned wolves. I'm currently working with a maned wolf, and it's pretty tricky to work with a maned wolf because the animal doesn't like to be touched, and it has to be touched twice a week to change some bandages and stuff. Uh, but we get some pretty cool cases working. Well, we're a national university, so we're public, and we work with the Ministry of the Environment. So any seizure first comes to us. We have to triage. We have to get the animal healthy, and then it can go to a zoo or a rescue center or back to the wild. So we see many cool cases, many pathogens we know are out there, but we still haven't found them. Many pathogens reported in every country around us, but still not in Paraguay. And I'm constantly looking out for that. And we have, okay, wait, once you start looking, you start finding, and that's pretty cool. We're now reporting the first case of inclusion body disease in snakes, something that's been happening in the whole world for many years, and we're having now the first report in Paraguay. This doesn't mean the disease didn't exist before that. There was just no one reporting it. The same thing with human herpes virus in primates, in non-human primates. It's something reported. I think the first report is from 1929 in New York, and 2023 is the first report in Paraguay. So almost 100 years later, the disease is there. It's obviously always been there, but we're not reporting it. So science-wise, we're getting started. We're getting started knowing what we have. Once we know what we have, we can dig in deeper in many other issues. As I'm a vet, I like to go into the health issues, but there's probably a lot to do about distribution and ecology on many species. And turtles are not always the first ones getting studied, nor the first ones getting the money. But I think there are many interesting things we still didn't know from turtles in South America, probably.
In sort of to wrap things up, I think maybe we can take a broader perspective for a second. What is, in terms of biodiversity, wildlife in Paraguay, what are the biggest issues currently? I think we've touched on this for turtles a bit, but perhaps you want to expand on that as well. But just from a biodiversity perspective, what are the biggest issues and how do we fix them?
I have to say impunity in a justice point of view, because the laws are in place, although the laws are really soft down here. I mean, you see in neighboring countries, people get to jail because of wildlife traffic. You see this in Brazil, in Argentina, even in Bolivia. In Paraguay, you don't go to jail. Maybe you get to pay a fine, which doesn't really always happen. So there's no problem really. You can buy the animal, you know it's illegal, but nothing happens. And one way or another, you're sustaining the whole wildlife traffic through impunity. You see rich people having their garden full of animals. I'm talking about blue macaws that are extinct in the wild in Paraguay. There are some crazy numbers, some estimates. Blue macaws, Anodorhynchus hyacintinus, I think there are less than 50 in the wild in Paraguay. So they're considered practically extinct. And there are more than 200 captive only in the capital city, in Asunción. So why? I mean, there is no legal way to get a wild animal in Paraguay. All the animals, according to our law, you can only buy animals from a certified breeding center. And there is no breeding center in Paraguay. So they're all from wildlife traffic. And why does this keep happening? Probably all my patients in the practice are from illegal traffic. I still have to treat them. I love to treat them. It's my way of doing some good to the species. But they're all from wildlife traffic. Why does this happen? Because people can buy them and nothing happens. I can tell the police, I can tell the prosecutors, this is where they are selling them. I even know for how much they're selling them, but nothing happens. So it's basically impunity.
Interesting. That's it seems to be a pretty recurrent theme. A lot of places we've talked about this in the turtle trade in Asia and such, and a lot of places that's specifically like, yeah. So it's interesting to think about that, and it's a tough one to fix because it's a political fix for the most part. But I guess the best way to do that is to make people aware of it and not like it because it's a bad thing for wildlife.
Well, the excuse is normally the cultural thing that supposedly we evolved living with the animals. If you see the population in the city, we're almost all of European descent. So we weren't the ones living in the wild with these animals. And
Yeah.
on the other hand, they don't, if they would at least take care of the animals. The problem is, okay, you start controlling this and you start seizing all these animals. Where do you take them? There's no place that could receive, in Paraguay at least, thousands of turtles, thousands of parrots. What do you make with all of them? So it should start as a gradual thing. Start controlling, start registering who has what animal, and start controlling that they keep them well, that they feed them well, that they take them to the vet, and at least make that sort of ex situ conservation.
People aren't keeping. When I think about it, there's sort of differences culturally. I'm curious in what the case is in Paraguay, but if you look at the United States, there are a lot of people that have a lot of captive animals. They just keep them not as much for a status symbol, maybe to some extent, but it's more just because they like to have a lot of things. It's like a very materialistic endeavor. But then you look in some other places in Asia where it's very much, I've got this animal because it's solely a status symbol and I'm not really caring for it. Where does Paraguay fall on that line of why people are keeping animals?
And it's pretty much both of them, really. From okay, there's the thing with, it depends on the species. Maybe the macaws are some status symbol, and the more endangered, the more status you have. But turtles are not really endangered yet. I think the Chaco tortoise is vulnerable, so it's not really that. It's more the need to have everything you see. It's probably mostly a compulsive buy. You see it in the market and you want it. You don't know why you want it, or you just buy it and you have it. You don't know how to have it. You do not Google about their food. You don't know anything. You just have it. And the moment the animal dies, they get another one. So it's not really an emotional link with the animal. It's just the need to have something strange. It's not even strange. I mean, it's native, but they see it as something strange.
Is habitat destruction and relationships between the people and animals, is that really an issue in Paraguay, or what are the general outlook of the population towards wildlife?
Again, it depends on the species. With turtles, I don't think it's an issue. I mean, they do lose habitat, but you don't see people in problem because a turtle came into the garden. It's more with the bigger animals. We see those issues with jaguars, with pumas, with cougars. That's an issue there, and the WCS is working a lot on those issues. We have that problem in the city, but with snakes and with didelphids. I don't remember the name in English. Opossums? I think it's opossums. It goes through an aesthetic thing. I mean, if the animal is perceived as ugly, it's a problem. If it's not that ugly, it's not a problem. Nobody cares about some birds in your garden or a turtle. But if it's a snake, if it's an opossum, it's a problem. And you don't know why. The animal is just there, but it's a problem. So there are some conflicts, yeah, but it's not general. It's more species specific. With bats, the same thing with bats. People, they're already scared because of rabies, but now this sort of association with COVID, and they're more scared, even more scared. But the issue is there. We're trying to do some sort of education with people. We get called a lot due to these conflicts, and we have to go to the people, talk to them, explain to them the animal isn't doing anything. The sole presence of the animal there, uh, nothing's gonna happen to you. I mean, the animal is just existing. You don't have to take care of him, but you also don't have to kill him. Just live and let live. It's called coexistence. We don't want you to sleep with the animal. We don't want you to feed the animal. Just let him live. If he came to you, he can go on his own again. But it's difficult. People are naturally afraid of snakes. People are naturally afraid of bats, of spiders. So that's where the problem is. With other animals, it's not a problem. With birds, it's not a problem. With fox, it's not a problem.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, in turn, we like to ask a last question. That is interesting to hear the response from a lot of different people. But I'm curious if you could give one piece of advice, the most important piece of advice to someone looking to make turtle and tortoise work or veterinary work a career, what would that be?
Do some research. And then you have to get hands on the work. I mean, you can read a lot about turtles, but once you start working with them, you will start to learn a lot of things, but mainly you will know everything you don't know about turtles and everything that has to be researched about turtles. And that's where we are today.
Cool. It's good advice. And at the end of every episode, we like to do a little turtle trivia. So I don't know if you've got, I've said this about 20 times, the past 20. I normally like to tell people this in advance, but I forgot again. So I don't know if you've got a random turtle trivia question. Honestly, because you've got such a holistic experience, we could do just general animal veterinary trivia. Or you can ask us questions. We can ask you questions. Any way you want to do this. We could do a few back and forths. And if you're not prepared, we don't have to do it either. That works too.
Oh no, I want to do this.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite species you've worked on? And why?
That
works. Jack, you want to take it first, or
I have serious trouble picking favorites, but I don't know if well, as far as what I have experience with, it's really hard to beat alligator snapping turtles. Those are like, I won't like outright say that I have a favorite, but those are in the top 5 like of all turtles in the world. They'll never not be there. They're just one of my favorites to ever work with. So I would say.
I think for me, it's I don't really have a favorite, but I have different types of memories associated with different turtles. Like the first research project I worked on was with southwestern pond turtles, and that's a very positive memory for me. It's still sort of ongoing. And then the radiated tortoises also comes to mind. That was just a good experience philosophically and in terms of just learning about people at a larger scale. I think that comes to mind. So it's like I don't really have a favorite individual species, but a lot of different memories associated with different species.
It's kind of how I'm kind of the same way with my my mud turtles in Delaware, but I don't talk about those a whole lot since I haven't published anything yet. So, but that's very close to my heart. Those turtles. So
that's the thing, really. You can't choose a favorite. You would be setting aside all the rest.
Yeah.
And that's not fair either. I mean, you just love all of them. It's like picking your favorite child.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, when right. You're interested in all. Yeah, it's like for us too. I think a lot of the appeal is being interested in all of them, all of the turtles. So it's like for certain people, they like to specialize, and you'll meet people that are just experts in one thing, which is cool too. But it's different for us. How about you? That we'll throw that question back at you. I think what's the favorite taxa you've worked with?
Well, obviously, turtles have been an important part of my still short-lived experience, but the whole experience regarding the one case of Hydromedusa tectifera, it was amazing. Everything I learned and the way that animal opened the scope about all the symbionts and all the ecology of the animal and the ecology around the animal, that was an amazing experience. So that's definitely one of my favorite animals because of everything that happened around the animal.
It was a range extension too, correct?
Yep.
That's
and that's back to what we talked in the beginning. The local population know that species is there forever. I mean, it was always there and people knew it. Just no one ever published it.
It's interesting. We in the Belize work that we did, this is a little different, but the narrow-bridged musk turtle, those ones we found that they were. I think it was about an 80-kilometer range extension where we were trapping them. It's an interesting case because we worked at a field station that's kind of removed from a lot of areas, so I don't think there were people there that knew about. And I guess it's not really comparable because this was literally just an extension that no one seemed to know about. Although some of the people that had worked there had talked about seeing turtles that look like that crossing the road at times in the past. And it was like, I think that there were definitely run-ins with them. And it's just that as Western biologists, we hadn't seen them. So it now is in the literature, and I think that's valuable. But it's like, yeah, the local knowledge is more extensive than I think we give credit to a lot of the time. So it's definitely good. I don't know if you've got any more trivia questions, or we can wrap up.
Oh, no, I'm dry.
Okay. Cool. Well, we can wrap this one up. If you've got anything else to say, but if not, it's been.
Well, I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you.
As are we. It's really been an honor to talk with you today. It's, for me personally, really interesting to focus on a specific area in its turtle assemblage, but also some of your veterinary work. It was fun to jump between those two things, and your knowledge is really extensive. So it was really fun to dive into some of those subjects.
And Colonia Cast came down to Paraguay. That's the first one.
That's true. Yeah, I think. Yeah, we've done. What are we? It's in South America now. We have people that represent Brazil, Argentina,
Colombia.
Yeah, Colombia. Yes. So 4 South American countries. So we've got to keep expanding that. So if you know anyone in Bolivia, Chile, Ecuador, I guess we could, Galapagos for that.
Galapagos is one too.
And Uruguay, those are all, and Venezuela. We've still got some stuff to do there. So, but thank you, Dr. Vetter. It's been a pleasure. And thanks for everyone listening. This has been episode 47.